Today, you are learning your second verb tense. You should already know how to use the simple past tense, which was the first verb tense we talked about. If you don't remember how to do that, you can find the simple past tense video in our video library, either somewhere down here, or you can click the link below and get our whole video library. Today, you're learning the simple present tense. Now, the simple present tense can be a difficult tense for a couple of reasons. First, a lot of students get confused about how the simple present tense is used. A lot of students will use the simple present tense to talk about the things that they are doing right now. But that is not the simple present tense. If you talk about things you are doing now, that's a different verb tense. That's called the progressive tense, okay? That's the present progressive. You're not going to learn that yet, even though you probably will learn it from practice and reading, and that's good. That's not today. That is not the simple present tense. The simple present tense doesn't talk about what is happening at this moment. The simple present tense talks about habits, which are things that we do all of the time. They're regular patterns of action or behavior. They talk about facts and opinions. We use the simple present tense to talk about facts and opinions. These are general statements that we believe to be true. Some people often confuse opinions with facts or facts with opinions, but we use the simple present tense to talk about these ideas very often. And lastly, the simple present tense is used when we are defining things, when we make definitions, when we say what we, again, believe about something. Definitions can kind of be included in the facts and opinions, but you have to learn to define your terms. And when you do that, you're probably going to be using the simple present tense. So that's one way in which students get confused or find the simple present tense difficult. And the other way is that the simple present tense is always going to follow the subject-verb agreement rule. We will talk a little bit about that today, but we're going to go into more detail about the subject-verb agreement rule in a future video. Today, the idea is this introduction to how we use the simple present tense, so let's look at some examples. I eat breakfast. This is something that I do every day. Without exception. Well, sometimes there might be an exception, but that doesn't change the general rule, okay? So when we use the simple present tense, somebody could argue, though, did you eat breakfast yesterday and the day before and every day of your whole life? And I would have to admit, no. Sometimes I skip breakfast. I wake up late, I'm in a hurry, I run out the door, and I don't eat. But that doesn't mean I can't use this sentence and tell you something that is generally true. Generally, I eat breakfast. Okay? So that would be a habit. Habits are something we do repeatedly, regularly, but it doesn't mean you have to do it every single time or every single day. Leslie runs. Now, this would be a good example of the subject-verb agreement rule. We have Leslie, which is a person, and this is Leslie's habit. Leslie runs. Okay, so you'll notice when we have one person, the verb is not just the bare infinitive. It's not the word we look up in the dictionary. We have to add an S. When Leslie runs with a friend, then we could say they run, and we would get rid of that S because when there's two subjects, then the verb would be the bare infinitive. It would be the word we look up in the dictionary. And that's the subject-verb agreement rule in a nutshell. Again, we'll talk more about that later. People are amazing. So here I am just giving a general opinion about people. And you might disagree. You might say, yeah, well, I know this one person who is not amazing at all. And I would say, well, you know, I still think even if you think someone is not amazing, that people in general are pretty amazing. They can do all sorts of cool things. And, you know, we got like 5 fingers, we got all this stuff inside of us, and it's pretty amazing, people. Like, it's my opinion. And I might even consider it a fact. You don't have to agree. But there it is. Jane doesn't run. So here, this is kind of important. When we negate, when we talk about something that we think is not true, or when it's factually not true, in relation to something else, here we have Leslie who runs, but Jane does not run, okay? When we use negatives, we always add the do verb for action verbs, so do plus not. When we put them together, either don't or doesn't. That's subject-verb agreement rule. And then the main verb, the verb that is the main idea verb we're talking about, which, you'll notice, doesn't change. We don't say Jane doesn't runs, even though Jane is only one person. The reason for that is when we have more than one word in a single verb idea, it's only the first word that will ever change according to subject-verb agreement, or even time or tense rules. Well, tense rules once you learn more of them. So, this is one that we see a lot of in terms of mistakes. Students want to use the subject-verb agreement rule with all of the words in the verb. But you don't have to. You only need to pay attention to the first word. And when you negate or say that something is not, does is always going to be the first, if it's an action verb. If it's going to be a being type verb, then it's going to be having some sort of description after, and we would have something like this. Michael is not funny. So you'll note, is the be verb, not is the negation that comes after, and then here's our adjective, funny. Michael is not funny. However, Chris and Tom are funny. So here we have the be verb following subject-verb agreement, okay? Is for one, are for more than one. Lastly, here is an example of those definitions. If I'm talking to students and I say, students, I want you to be good students, then a student might ask, teacher, what do you mean by a good student? And I would say, well, good students study. This is what I mean when I talk about good students. And in contrast, or in opposite, bad students do not study. So here again, you can look at the difference, okay? Study is the active verb. That's what good students do. They study. Bad students, plural, do not, as opposed to doesn't. Why? Because we're talking about more than one. Bad students do not study. So, in review, usage is not what we are doing right now, okay? It's talking about habits, facts, opinions, and definitions. The subject-verb agreement rule we'll get to later. Now, let's get to the review questions.
Intro to Simple Present Tense. How do we use the simple past tense? We use the simple past tense to talk about things that happened in the past and are finished. How do we use the simple present tense? We use the simple present tense to talk about habits, facts, opinions, definitions. What are habits? Habits are things we usually do. What are facts and opinions? Facts are things that are true. Opinions are things we think are true. What does the simple present tense not do? It does not talk about what you are doing right now. What do you always need to do when using the simple present tense? You must always use subject-verb agreement.